Welcome, everyone, to the captive audience. We're starting a bit late due to me being trapped in traffic, the traffic that they love to create and will never solve in the Portland metro area, at least not on the west side. And I'm Kevin Hoare, and it is the 6th of August. And we are very fortunate to have with us tonight one of our regular guests that come on probably about once a month, and Dave Huguenel. And it's been quite a month, to say the least. I think since the last time we talked, there was an assassination attempt, a Republican National Convention, a crash and burn of Joe Biden and his replacement by Kamala Harris. And then as of today, a vice presidential nominee picked by Kamala Harris of Governor Walz from Minnesota. And of course, we also have J.D. Vance was selected by President Trump as his running mate. So, geez, I usually joke that in just a few days, so much news happens that it's like a year's worth of news, but that's like a decade.
No, I mean, look, I think that literally like any single piece of news that you just mentioned could be like an entire class worth of time at like a political science class in a college somewhere.
Yeah.
Like I feel bad for like the students 20 years from now taking political science that have to study this era that we're in at the moment. Like this is going to be a painful thing in terms of what you have to memorize in terms of the timeline. It's a lot has happened, and I also had to come on the show. I am going to eat a giant plate of crow because it seems like for the better part of a year, you, Kevin Hoare, have been adamant that they were going to replace Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, and I was pretty aggressive in saying absolutely not. That is never going to happen. You know what? It's more likely that someone's going to assassinate President Trump before they get him off the ballot. But joking, but no, it happened. You were right. It was shocking to me that that they were able to pull that off. I know they obviously kind of had to drag Biden kind of off the stage, so to speak, but I just didn't think they'd be successful. Turns out that they were. So here we are. This is. I actually just wrote an article. It's funny. The beginning of July, I have to write these like sort of marketing emails for my company, and the one that I started before all this happened. I'm a big believer when it comes to running a campaign, you kind of have to embrace the I don't know kind of aspect of things. Like you need to create a plan, but also understand that there's going to be things that are outside of your control that are going to change things up. So I started writing that in like the first half, end of June, beginning of July. Then I kind of put it on the table, kind of forgot about it, got busy with other stuff. Then all this sort of stuff happens, right? And then I go back to finish it. I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I meant a month ago. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. This obviously has a major effect on a lot of different campaigns. So here we are. Who the hell knows what's going to happen? You know, maybe you and I just need to start talking on a daily basis just so we can keep up with all this.
No one should use the word predictable from here on out.
No.
And I think that my belief that Joe Biden would be replaced was rooted in less in the fact that they just wanted to get someone else and more in the fact that they weren't going to go down with the Biden ship. And the only thing that was truly predictable about Joe Biden is Joe Biden wasn't going to get any better. If they knew that it was getting worse and there was no like comeback kid thing that was going to happen, because it couldn't. He couldn't become more cognitively capable. He couldn't become younger. He couldn't suddenly say something so impressive. No, really, Joe Biden totally relied on Donald Trump to do something that would literally make it so that Joe Biden couldn't lose. And Donald Trump wasn't doing that. So, and as they tried harder and harder to do things like that they thought were surefire, you know, we'll get rid of this guy type of stuff by filing all these, you know, criminal cases against him and pretending like some kind of lawsuit was produced a guilty verdict in a and something that the president insisted all the way through. He didn't even know this person. Um, the more the president looked like he'd been telling the truth all along, and all this other stuff was garbage. Then he raised a ton of money off of it, and then they had the debate. Now, I actually do think that someone knew how badly Joe Biden was going to do in that debate, who had some influence over the decision as to whether or not he took that debate. I just kind of believed that going into the debate, and I don't think anything has caused me to think otherwise coming out, other than the fact that the one person who wasn't wise to how badly he would do in the debate was Joe Biden. And I think maybe Jill Biden had some sort of belief, because she still believed he did a good job afterwards. That's how delusional she was.
Yeah.
So once that was done, it was like it's like in the movie Titanic, when they scraped alongside the iceberg and then they pulled away, and then they sat there, and then they started checking how many compartments had been breached.
Yeah.
And then the guy goes, the guy who built the ship said, "This ship is going to sink. It's going to be at the bottom of the Atlantic in just a couple of hours. It's a mathematical certainty." And that's where Joe Biden was not too long after his debate performance.
And here we are, just a few weeks later. You've made some room for me on the door. We're both floating. We're floating in the Atlantic together. Unlike Jack and Rose, you made room. I didn't have to drown. No spoilers, by the way. If you haven't seen the Titanic, it's a 20-year-old movie, but so no, it's certainly been wild. And look, it's part of the reason I wrote that blog post about not knowing is, I think when it comes to campaign consultants and campaign operatives, we're kind of paid to know, right? When a client calls me and they're like, "What's going to happen?" A lot of times, like, a lot of consultants will be like, "Oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be this, that, this," right? There's this sort of incentive for us to be overconfident, right? And comfort our clients. What I kind of argue, or in that blog post, is like, look, we're actually going to do our clients a better favor if we tell them the truth, especially in an election like this. Anyone that's telling you they know exactly what's going to happen is either a time traveler, which cool if they are, or they're a liar. They're not, like that. That's what's, I think, super important to remember about this election. When you start looking at the pundits on Fox News or MSNBC or whatever you watch, and you see that them exuding that confidence, know that is just a shroud of them, over the fact that they have no idea what's going to happen. They anyone that's listening to this stream, just as much about what's going to happen in this election as any pundit that shows up on a news show tonight. That's just the truth.
Yeah, I think also a lot of these folks that are out there trying to say what they think is going to happen are saying what they think is going to happen in order to influence what is going to happen. It seems now that less of the pundits are really honest, like, well, here's what I think and here's the evidence for that. And more, I don't know if I have any evidence for this, but I'm just going to repeat as much as possible. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the ultimate, like the media, a good portion of the media has utterly destroyed its own credibility, and they've done it repeatedly. And now, after covering up for Joe Biden, I think they're kind of maybe teetering a little bit, because who's going to believe any of these news networks when they talk about how amazing and wonderful Kamala Harris is, when there's literally video over and over and over of her saying things that she really meant, that she can't really take back? That is what she is, who she really is. When she answered, that the answers she gave when she didn't have a teleprompter in front of her, written speech by someone else, but in fact, she actually said, I think within the first 100 days, we should confiscate all these guns. Well, I didn't mean that. Or that she wants to get rid of private health insurance and replace it with single payer national health care. We can name
Right.
half a dozen things that she said full conviction. And now they want us to believe the one who's packaged, who hasn't done a single interview with the media, probably won't do one. And the media is more than happy to let her get away with it because they were in on this. Now they are trying to save the bacon of themselves and what they believe to be their political fortunes because they're all in on trying to make sure Joe Biden got across the finish line. And then she just made a pick today that is, I don't know, to me, it's stunningly bad. This is like the Bernie Sanders of governors in the country. This guy would fit right in Oregon, except I think he'd be a liability in Oregon. He's that far to the left. And I got to hear some of the things described about him. And I know elections aren't decided necessarily by vice presidents, but if you're going to help a ticket, I don't see how it's doing that. And then she managed to pick one of the few people that actually looks older than Joe Biden. And they showed some video recently of him standing next to Joe Biden and like, yeah, those are two pretty old white guys.
Yeah.
But they flipped it so that she's at the top of the ticket and the old white guys riding side saddle. But
yeah,
what do you think about this?
What I think about, like when we talk about VP picks, because I can kind of break down my thoughts on JD Vance and as well in terms of, you're absolutely right. Whoever you pick as VP, it doesn't really affect the outcome of the election in any significant way. Some people can argue, if they're a governor of a battleground state, like if she had picked Shapiro, maybe that would have helped her more in Pennsylvania. But again, you're talking within the margins. To me, what VP choices really are important and sort of what they matter is, to me, they're like an insight into the brain of the presidential candidate and what they care about and what they're thinking
and how they make decisions.
So when I look at like JD Vance, Trump's pick with JD Vance, what I see in JD Vance is a young state senator. He is, part of the MAGA movement, right? I see President Trump trying to, help establish his legacy after his presidency, right? The MAGA movement within the Republican Party, kind of giving that another pillar in JD Vance. That's what I kind of see there. You also see there's obviously the issues of loyalty and things like that, but fundamentally, that's the value statement that I see with JD Vance, right? Is trying to secure his legacy after his political career, Trump's political career is over. What I see with Kamala's pick with Walz is that there's been this struggle in the Democratic Party for a while now. This isn't breaking news, but there is a division between what we might consider more moderate or normal maybe Democrats, right? Folks that just frankly aren't as crazy. Versus
common sense Democrats. I would call them common sense Democrats.
Well, I don't want to say common sense because I disagree with all of them. I don't know if any Democrat has common sense. So, but yeah, like there's the ones that are just not as crazy, right? But then, and at least they're not as crazy compared to the other wing, which are the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, pro-defund the police, just absolute communist liberals that basically Portland, right? Like that's the other wing of the Democratic Party. And with Kamala, she had a choice of which direction was she going to go. Now, she's a former attorney general, former U.S. senator from California. She has a very liberal record. She has been pro defund the police. She's been pro open border. She is, she's got all of the like liberal bona fides, right? So she had the ability, if she wanted to pick a more moderate Democrat as her VP. Instead, she chose Walz, which is, like you said, kind of a Bernie Sanders governor. Very liberal, very socially liberal, very, very not someone that I think is going that folks in Georgia or Pennsylvania or Ohio or Nevada connect with. So why did she do it? I think fundamentally the value statement, what I see in Kamala Harris's brain is that she is either very afraid of or very tied into that far left part of the party. Yeah. That she feels like that because the far left of the party likes this pick, right? The more if the Democratic version of me, I guarantee you would have loved like a Josh Shapiro or even a Mark Kelly from Arizona. Those would have been very strategic choices that could have actually had an impact in two very important battleground states. It's some people might debate that Minnesota is a battleground state. It kind of sort of is. It's close in a lot of ways, but it's certainly not a battleground compared to Pennsylvania or Arizona. This presidential election, will be decided on whoever wins Pennsylvania and potentially whoever wins Arizona. Those two states are extremely important.
Yeah, and they had options in both of them, by the way, didn't they?
Frankly, and not just options, good options. I mean, Josh Shapiro is a young, up-and-coming governor. I think he is seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party. He's also got some sort of moderate bona fides about him. I mean, he's been pro-school choice, and he's been doing some things that the left wing of the Democratic Party haven't been big fans of. Same thing goes with Mark Kelly. I mean, look, I'm not gonna say that. I feel like I'm like saying like really nice things about Democrats.
Yeah, they're not gonna get your vote.
Just so that I might have to go take a shower after this. But Mark Kelly, he's an astronaut. I mean, that's cool. I mean, that's
consultants. We can see how this plays.
It's I mean, look, it's not easy to become an astronaut. He did that successfully, and then became a U.S. senator. I mean, the guy's obviously a very accomplished guy, politician. And instead, she went with Walz. That a governor of a state that probably doesn't matter in the Electoral College, a governor that has got some really checkered, points on certain issues that I think most American swing voters are not going to like. It's a weird pick.
Well, you almost want somebody who's just a spokesperson for your point of view, maybe reassures some people that are going to be a little squirrely about the presidential nominee, calms them down so they feel like, they're part of the. I think that's something that the President Trump did with Mike Pence. I think that was really what he did there, is to reassure like conservatives who didn't really know President Trump yet. And so there are purposes at times within your coalition, and it would seem like this is not only something that doesn't help you in any particular swing state,
right?
But this guy, as I learned more about him, he told the people in Minnesota that because they didn't have enough DEI at the heart of all of the things they do, they deserved the George Floyd riots. And he did nothing for 5 whole days while Minneapolis burned to the ground. And then I don't know why. I don't know if the people working with Kamala thought of this, but I came up with it in a New York second. He let them riot. Then she bailed them out. She raised money for the bailout funds. And so they literally endorsed the George Floyd riots in one single moment. And I don't think that that's going to at all help in any swing state. There isn't a swing state that thought George Floyd riots sound great. Nor did they tolerate that kind of stuff to any great degree in 2020. That if they were just running for president of Oregon, maybe.
Right.
But not president of the United States.
And actually, as we're talking, I mean, one of the listeners just commented on Facebook about, maybe some of these folks said no, they didn't want to run with her because that would ruin their personal aspirations. That's actually something that I've thought about. It's certainly possible. I have no evidence one way or the other that that's true, but it's a very plausible theory. I mean, and frankly, the one that it applies the most is someone I didn't mention, which is Pete Buttigieg, someone that is absolutely beloved in Democrat circles. I mean, I think Democrat activists tend to love him. He comes across as easy to understand, I guess. He does have this ability to kind of distill, complex issues in a way that I think average voters can just kind of get with, right? And you feel like they're having a conversation with him. That would have been a very interesting, exciting choice for Kamala. But I could totally see someone like Mayor Pete being like, you know what, like I'm young, I'm in the admin right now, things are going great. I'm gonna wait and see how this plays out, and I'll see what I want to do in 2028.
Yeah, and they might actually. I mean, I know that there's some poll that says Harris is up 4 points against Trump in a national poll. I don't think that matters because we know not anything out of the swing states, outside of the swing states or potential swing states matters, and that's just the fact that Harris is not Biden. That's where
Right.
all that money came from that wasn't coming in. It suddenly came in because it wasn't coming in for about 6 weeks for Biden. And then we see national numbers go up because New York, California, and Illinois are big populations, and some of that support for Biden was depressed and it bounced up.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen necessarily in the national vote totals, but it doesn't matter. It only matters what happens in the swing states, not how many touchdowns you can score in California and New York, right?
Right. Yeah, we're definitely past the point where there's a point in the cycle where I pay attention to national polls, not so much because they're going to tell me who's going to win or lose, but it's nice to kind of see what the trends look like.
Yeah,
You know,
momentum. Yeah,
yeah, just overall, kind of like where it's almost like kind of like testing like the national mood, sort of, so to speak, just kind of
yeah,
where things are at. Um, you know, we're at the point now where I care less about those. I'm looking at internal polls for the states where I have clients that are working. I'm also, and if I care about the presidential race, and if I'm paying attention to that, I'm looking at battleground polls and electoral college states that matter: Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, those types of places. Um, there's I I will say this in terms of Kamala's bump that she's seen, it makes sense that she would have this honeymoon period. It worked out well for her that Biden's dropping out coincided with the Republican National Convention. So as soon as you know Republicans kind of had this amazing earned media sort of blitz right through July.
yeah.
The media over the assassination attempt, the media around our pick for JD Vance, the media around the convention. Now it's their turn. You're going to see their money go up, which you just mentioned, and you're going to see their polling go up. That's just kind of political gravity at work. This early, even a battleground state, to see polls move. For Kamala for a little bit, it doesn't surprise me. I do expect that all of these polls are going to tighten up and get back to pretty close to where they were, pre Biden dropping out. I think the reality is that people didn't like Joe Biden as a presidential candidate. Part of that was they didn't like the policies of the Joe Biden administration, of which Kamala is born from. So that has to get litigated through campaign messaging and that sort of stuff. But once voters are like, oh, a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for another 4 years of this nonsense, like hard pass.
Well, and then there was this illusion that they were able to keep going for a good long time, especially in 2020, that Joe Biden was Scranton Joe, the more moderate, reasonable guy. And therefore that's what you could expect, is like the adults are back in charge and all the crazy stuff ends, and it didn't end. It went nuts.
Yeah.
But what we got Joe Biden as the figurehead, and then we got Bernie Sanders as the policies, and the person who lines up with Bernie Sanders policies is Kamala Harris. She actually articulates the same positions, not as well as Bernie Sanders does, by the way. And so she just has this identity politics thing that she can throw on top of it. What are they going to do in their convention and in the coming weeks to polish her up? Because I know that the stuff I've heard just so far almost writes itself as TV ads, things she said, things she's done. The record of the Biden administration looks like the things she says she wants to do more of. And so therefore, we know that every penny President Trump spends is probably going to have to be spent, especially early on, and making sure everybody knows just how bad Kamala is and just how much she reflects what you were unhappy with about the Biden administration. She actually cast the votes, the deciding votes, on the bills that passed the Senate that have brought us all this inflation, those spending bills. She was the borders are. And they're trying to whitewash that. Too late. The administration owns the border and everything they did to it. And all this spins is not working. And all we're going to do is repeat borders are. And you can literally show clips from Joe Biden naming her as the lead from reducing the flow of illegal migrants into the border. And it literally skyrocketed after that. And then she didn't go to the border, and she thanked him for that role. These TV ads won't have to show Donald Trump until the end where he says, I approve this message.
Right.
It's just going to show Kamala Harris saying what she really said and what she really thinks. And then we show San Francisco and say, all these policies, this is what it looks like when they do all of what they want to do.
Right. Well, and look, we have San Francisco, we have Minneapolis, like we've got there are, especially with Walz as the pick. I think in my mind, what's fascinating about the Democrat slate now with Kamala and Walz is if they were to get elected in November, you're looking at probably the most liberal president and most liberal vice president in our nation's history. I was, as you were talking, I was trying to think of like who might be more liberal than them. Maybe someone could make an argument for like FDR pre-world, like in the 1930s, maybe. I don't know. That might be. But I mean, this is probably the most liberal president our country will ever have if she were to win. And I think that
I'd be worried about being the last one, the way things could end up, because I know that I am laughing my freaking butt off in China and in Russia and all the adversaries. Iran must be looking at this thinking, this is our moment, folks. She gets in there because they sent her to Poland to say that they had Vladimir Putin deterred, that he knows that we're serious because we've got all these sanctions ready to go. And you know what Vladimir Putin, he said, here I go. I'm going right in. Yeah. And it didn't work out so well for Putin militarily, but there is something to the U.S. and the president being taken seriously and frankly being feared by adversaries. Like you put enough doubt in them that you don't have to fight wars because they don't just know you're strong. They sense that you have will and determination and you know what you're doing. She's a scatterbrain. Yeah. When she's left to her own devices, and this pick that she just did kind of shows a little bit of that.
No, for sure. Excuse me, I'm still getting over a cold, so I'm sorry I'm like hacking up your live stream tonight. But
no, that's all right.
And well, going back to just her, this being potentially the most liberal president our country's ever had, when I look at the United States, if I look at American citizens, what I see when I travel, when I talk to folks, just when I anecdotally with my family, and I've got Republican family members, Democrat family members, at the end of the day, what Americans really care about is they care about stability. They care about their being able to run their lives and hope that it's not disrupted by a bad economy. It's not disrupted by an over forceful government, and certainly not disrupted by something that happens overseas with a foreign with a foreign war or something like that.
Yeah, and they tend to like a divided government to maybe make that happen.
For sure, there are like divided government, things like that. At the end of the day, I think if you're one of those voters and you're trying to think of and what you care about are things like catharsis and just like calm, I get that. Yeah, like Trump can say some crazy stuff on Truth Social. He can put out some tweets that kind of make you look twice. But if you look at the policies of President Trump's 4 years in office versus what we've seen with Biden over the last 4 years,
the policies and the results,
right? Policies and the results, and then on top of that, Kamala being not just an extension of the Biden administration, but an Biden administration that's more emboldened to do more radical things. If you're trying to figure out like which administration is more cathartic, to me, the Trump administration is a much safer bet for the average American than a Kamala Harris administration.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a totally almost a no-brainer. And I think it was that way going into even the debate, is that people are like, you know what? It was a lot more peaceful. It was a lot more prosperous when you wind the clock back 4 years. COVID was a blip, an aberration, a disruption, which threw things into the air and clearly affected the 2020 election. But, I don't think that Kamala has reinforced their confidence that there's competent decision making. I mean, I think one of the ads that I literally try to run as much as possible is just one of her laughing for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
All the different times she cackles when she gets asked a question, her response, just she's not a serious person. And that's why I'm worried about on foreign policy and national security. If foreign leaders are not going to look at this the way we do. This isn't just infotainment. For them, they look at somebody who's not a serious person in charge of a very serious country, and start to think, you know what? I think we can do what we want.
Right.
And this person is bozo. Well, what happens when someone is going to be tested like that? I believe the real danger is you are more likely to end up in wars, because somebody who's not serious and is perceived to be weak and foolish will have to overcompensate for that by being super tough and super serious. And that's when you end up in a war that you shouldn't have ended up in the first place at all. That's
Right.
a real concern. And wars really have defined history. We know that. And it would be nice to go back to the old days where just domestic politics, and every once in a while we had some international conflict, which would cause people to pay attention to that. But
Well,
this person's a fool,
Right, and to your point too. I mean, look, we have a looming, foreign policy catastrophe about to unfold in the Middle East right now, where we might have Iran, which is a regional superpower, attacking our strongest ally, Israel. Literally, it could happen any minute.
And Trump had that country on its knees 4 years ago, which is worth reminding people of, because why weren't there problems? Well, because if they did something, they knew that they get Soleimani, that that guy that hatched this plan and tried to kill some Americans, was driving down a road in Iraq thinking he was all good, and boom, they turned him into a smoldering tin can, his car. And that's what's going to happen. And that's why the Taliban didn't mess with Trump, because when he told them, look, if you kill anybody, I'm going to just completely destroy you guys. And he told it to them directly on the phone. He didn't wait for. Do you think anybody's going to believe Kamala Harris when she says something like that?
Right. Well, and here's the thing. She would never say something like that. Right. She just wouldn't. I don't. I mean, and I say that I don't think Biden has never said anything like that to any of our adversaries.
He just said, "Don't,
please."
Yeah, really.
No, we are. I would say in my lifetime, this is, I think, probably the weakest America has been is these last couple years, and potentially going into the future. If we elect Kamala Harris, I mean, it's a pretty scary situation that we're in right now.
I didn't think we'd revisit the Jimmy Carter lows, but I think we are near it. And the sad thing is,
luckily, I mean, I'm not old enough. I was born during Reagan's first administration, so that was.
I remember Jimmy Carter, and that is the closest analogy to what I think we were experiencing a month ago with Joe Biden. It was that feeling like helplessness, kind of incompetence and foolishness. We were blundering into things, and it wasn't just international stuff. It was the economy. Like everything he was doing, he was literally describing that we're in a malaise, right? It was not a confidence building guy. He couldn't convince people that we were able to do. And America started feeling like they really couldn't do these things. Yeah. And I kind of started feeling that same feeling, except that too much of America doesn't seem to realize just how bad these guys are at even just being they think that I heard Laura Ingraham say last night, they think that everything that's been going on during their administration is just a communications problem.
Yeah.
It's not an actual hardcore policy failure. It's just they haven't figured out how to get those fools to understand how awesome they are at doing this stuff. And they also don't, the people in charge don't seem to understand how much people are being affected by things like inflation and how frustrated they are with it. But I'm also concerned that I don't know if we make decisions the same way we did in 1980. I'd like to believe that we can redeem ourselves. Having said that, Jimmy Carter was leading Reagan late in the presidential race until the first debate, when people got to see them side by side. But that was September of 1980. And then it just turned into a landslide. It became a 10-point landslide. And I think that's where Biden was heading had he stayed in the race. I'm pretty sure it would have looked like that. Now I'm really not sure, because I hope we can tell this story. We got to tell the story of just how, so here's something I learned about Waltz, is that, first of all, he had some of the toughest COVID restrictions in the country, and really went after everybody but protesters. So this is almost like having the Portland mayor be chosen as your vice presidential pick. Except the Portland mayor doesn't think it's a good idea anymore, and this guy still thinks it is. And then his wife actually said that she's like opposes incarceration of criminals, and just talks constantly about this stuff. I don't know. I know that the vice presidents don't determine who wins, but can they be enough of a liability? Sarah Palin turned into a liability for John McCain at some point, right?
Yep. So does Waltz become a liability for Kamala? It's a good question. I mean, I think the difference with McCain and Palin versus Kamala and Waltz is, with McCain and Palin, you kind of had this ideological split between the two, right? Like,
yeah, that's true.
He was a much more moderate Republican, whereas, Palin was kind of Tea Party Republican at the time. I mean, certainly kind of MAGA, pre-MAGA. So
yeah, she was.
With Waltz and Kamala, they're kind of cut from the same cloth. So,
yeah,
I don't know that if Waltz is a liability to Kamala, then that probably means that Kamala is a liability to Kamala.
Yeah, well, and I think there's some basis for saying that. If you've tried to hear her explain what people are experiencing with inflation, you're like, what? A reasonable person who doesn't know anything about her could start listening to this answer and say, who is she again? The vice president? It doesn't mean you have to have a political point of view on her. I actually think that most of the people that are supporting her strongly right now, they don't know anything about her. And same with swing voters who might be open to her. They don't know anything about her.
Right.
But I do want to switch back to one subject real quick, because I know we got to wrap up here, and I really appreciate you hanging on here until the 7 o'clock, which is your 10 o'clock, right? Yeah. Is President Trump. What does he got to do now? What is his mission? And JD Vance, what do you think of the pick? What do you think JD Vance does? Because there's been some ups and downs there too recently, even though it's tempest in a teapot.
Yeah, the ups and downs with JD Vance. To me, they're somewhat over right now that Kamala is picture VP. Kind of all eyes go on him for a little bit. So there's always this kind of like weird sort of like attack phase for the pick. People praising it, people attacking it. That happened with JD Vance. I think we're kind of outside that window. JD Vance's real value to the Trump ticket really comes into play now. His ability to raise money in Silicon Valley, his ability to connect with voters in the Rust Belt, for sure. All those sorts of things. I think with Trump, I think he gets back to what he was doing prior to July, right? Prior to July, and not say that July was bad. It was actually a very good month politically for the president. But what he has to do is get back to litigating, you know, what life was like under a Trump administration versus what life was like under a Biden administration, because it's Kamala Harris, right? Everything that the Biden administration's done, she has culpability.
He owns it. Yeah.
Especially the border. She was probably the border czar, even though she never went down there. There are that's what the campaign has to kind of get back into, and you're starting to see them do a lot of that sort of stuff too, in both their messaging and their paid advertising. So that's the move. It bore out a ton of success for President Trump leading up to Biden dropping out. There's nothing that tells me that portion of the playbook has to change, right? It's just a little bit of Mad Lib. You're taking Joe Biden's name out, you're putting Kamala Harris in.
So there was a concern that the Democrats had that I think was motivating part of their, dump Joe Biden thing, or abandon Brandon is what I heard. It's a good one.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And that is the effect he was going to have on every other of the federal races. So the Senate and the House. And the Senate does look like it's got a real good chance of going Republican still. Mm-hmm. Especially because of West Virginia and what happened there, and only a third of it's up for election. And we've got we've got seats in states that are Trump or leaning Trump, or redder states, like Ohio, for instance, where we might be able to take some of these seats. But the House of Representatives, I think the Democrats, because that's where the support for Biden really started crumbling, was there were like one or two, then there were 3 or 4, then there were like 15, and then there were rumors of 20 and 30, and they were overlapping with the exact people who were on those same lists of vulnerable reelects that the Democrats were worried about. Where do you think all of this goes now, especially since if you win the presidency, you're not going to get a lot accomplished if you don't have the House of Representatives?
Well,
it's tough.
One thing that's interesting to me, Biden being at the top of the ticket, to me, was like a double-edged sword if you're a Democrat running for Congress, because on one hand, he's a horrible top of the ticket, right? Like, and that's why they were panicking. There were polls across the country that showed Biden losing districts that he won by 10 in 2020, losing them by 5 to 10 points in 2024. That's a huge swing. Yeah. That's not normal. So obviously those Democrats are like, holy cow, like we can't have this guy at the top of the ticket. We got to get rid of him. That said, here's the positive to Biden being at the top of the ticket. No one wanted to, in Democrat circles, no one wanted to donate to the Biden campaign. So all that money was going to House and Senate races.
Oh, yeah.
Now you've got Kamala Harris, and Democrat donors are excited. They're sending tons of money to that campaign. And granted, there's always more money. Like, I'm not saying that like the House candidates can't raise money, but like that's some of the money that's going to her would have gone to House races or Senate races instead.
It's a shift. Yeah.
It's a bit of a shift. If you're a swing seat Democrat in Pennsylvania, that's not a bad thing, because a lot of her money's going to get spent there. Same with Georgia or these battleground states. But if you're a swing seat Democrat in Oregon or California or Washington, those are states where Kamala Harris for president money is not going to get spent there. So that to me is a little bit of an interesting dynamic. I still think at the end of the day, and there's a lot of public polling that bears this out, voters are frustrated with Democratic policies. They're frustrated with defund the police. They're frustrated with an open border. They're frustrated with an increase in crime. So while Democrats were successful in kind of getting rid of their boogeyman, like, it was Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, that's why we're having these problems.
Yeah.
Really, by getting rid of him, I would argue they just kind of put newspaper over spilt milk, right? Yeah. The true problem and the true reason that they're not popular is that their policies aren't popular. And as long as Republican campaigns continue to bear that out and remind voters that the reason that your cars keep getting broken into, the reason that you're seeing more tents, on the side of the interstate,
all pouring in the streets.
Yeah, the reason we have more fentanyl, in our neighborhoods, Those are Democrat policies that led to that. And as long as that's borne out, then I think Republicans have a good November.
Yeah, and I also think that if people have been doing the work they were supposed to be doing, regardless of what was going on in the presidential race, then it's starting to pay off, actually. Which in the case of, we know here in Oregon, certainly Lori's race, Lori Chavez Dreamer, is a very important race, highly targeted. We've got the 6th district of Mike Erickson and Salinas, and of course the 4th district with Monique Despain taking on Val Hoyle. And it seems like those races are kind of where they should be if you want to be competitive. There's going to be money going into them, but there's also the belief that maybe Republicans have a real opportunity here, because a lot of these issues you just mentioned that people are unhappy with, they are particularly intense in Oregon. Like, people are particularly affected by all those things. Even though it's bad in other places, it's like you can immediately say homelessness, fentanyl, tents, crime, inflation, cost of living, and it's like you just get a lot of nodding heads here in Oregon when that is mentioned.
Right. So, and I know we're about to end. I do need to do a quick disclaimer for your viewers, because it occurred to me, as I was sipping on my drink, it looks like I'm drinking a giant beer or something. That is not what this is. This is actually sparkling water with mango flavor in it. It just looks like a giant beer can. So I just hope that your viewers don't know. I get that it's late. It's after hours over here, but I have too much respect for captive audience to be chugging a tall boy while we're chatting. So this is sparkling water, I promise.
I appreciate the disclaimer, and we can't even read what it says because all the words are kind of backwards. Yeah. You have to kind of flip it around to the image around for it to work. But thank you for saying that. I do think that you'd be more than entitled to one large beer at this point in the evening, because I know that these are long hours on campaigns at this time of year, and the blurry eye, the travel, the hard work, and getting everything ready. This is what's happening right now, isn't it?
I always want to make sure I'm giving you just stone cold political advice, stone cold sober political advice. That's the goal.
Well, so there we go.
So the beer's after the show.
Yep. Well, cheers to the next several weeks. I can't even imagine what September could look like, but by then we will probably have had a Democrat convention. I say probably because I'm not actually gonna predict anything could really happen the way we think. They've already nominated her anyway, so who knows when the Hamas supporters all start rioting in Chicago, if they call it off and say, well, we already got a nominee.
I'm going to go ahead and guess. Just the trajectory that we're on right now, based on what happened in July, I'm going to say August is World War III, aliens invade, and there's a Jurassic Park style uprising in a Caribbean island, and they escape across the across the globe. I think those 3 happen in August or September.
That's right. And maybe we'll have a Labor Day asteroid hits the Earth.
Asteroids September for sure. That's post Labor Day.
Yeah. And then we'll see if there's still a debate between Kamala and Trump at that point. But
well, one thing's for certain. This show, Captive Audience, we'll be here for all of it.
There will be pieces of asteroid coming down, and we will still be going live just like we're doing now.
Love it.
Hey, 217 traffic didn't stop us. Nothing can stop us. So there you go. Well, Dave, thanks for joining me here tonight. As always, it's a blast, and for your sage advice and insight. I know all of our listeners and viewers really appreciate it, as do I. So thank you for joining us.
Okay, I'm going.
And thanks everyone for watching. Please share the show with everyone you can, and we should be back on tomorrow night with another episode of The Captive Audience. We'll have Don and Sunny, and I'm actually hoping to get a show coming up sometime soon with Representative Ed Deal, where we're going to talk about, I think it's Measure 118, although I think somebody said Measure 18, and now I'm not even sure which one it is. But it's the one that's going to have a 3% tax on corporations so they can create a universal basic income. That's right. Oregon doesn't get it. But hopefully enough voters get it, and we will talk, because Ed has some stuff to share with you about that. We all need to let people know. And of course, there's ranked choice voting, which he will also talk about. That's going to be on the ballot. I know the crazy never ends here in Oregon, but we'll address it and make sure you know about